Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon is a podcast which focuses on contemporary social and educational issues from an educational leadership and behavioral research perspective. We will delve into those issues that are important to you as we listen to understand the needs of others and positively respond to address those needs, concerns, and/or fears. Professionals in their respective fields of expertise, in addition to friends of the podcast, will share their unique perspectives of positive solutions to what matters to you most. Join us every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central Time, as we share positive solutions to those issues that are important to you.
A pleasant good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining me on Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon. We are very fortunate today to have with us Professor Maria Rosaria Piomelli Ambrosi. We also call her Professor Piomelli. So before we get to meet her, as you know, she is the first female dean of architecture in the United States. And so before we get to meet Professor Piomelli, let us begin with our fun trivia segment of the podcast.
Do you know a whole lot of information that you would like to utilize in a fun and useful way? Or perhaps you like learning new fun facts, which can be used as conversation starters at a meal with a friend or while standing in a long line. The Ultimate Trivial Pursuit Question and Answer book contains fun facts of sports and leisure, science and nature, arts and literature, history, entertainment, and geography. Test your skills with others every week as we begin our episodes with fun trivia. You'll be given 6 questions at the beginning of the podcast, and you will have the opportunity to post your correct answers to all 6 questions to drgordonpodcast1@gmail.com. The first person to post all 6 correct answers will have their names announced as the winner on the following episode. The person with the most wins after 50 episodes will win a gift certificate from our podcast's gift basket of tangible goodies. Who knows? Maybe you can win dinner for 2 at a restaurant in your area, or enjoy a full body massage from a licensed health and fitness spa. Don't be bashful. Join the fun every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central Time on this podcast, Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon.
Now, are you ready for the trivia questions? Do you have a pen and a sheet of paper? So today, our trivia pursuit questions are taken from arts and literature. So let's go. I'm going to say the questions twice. Listen carefully, write them down if you can, and make sure that you have the correct answer so that you can have them submitted to Dr. Gordon Podcast 1@gmail.com. So let's begin right away. Number 1, what writer invented a middle initial to go with her real first one, as her publisher feared boys wouldn't buy books by a woman? What writer invented a middle initial to go with her real first one, as her publisher feared boys wouldn't buy books by a woman? And by the way, the category that we're working on today is arts and literature. Question number 2. What 1955 musical movie was filmed in Arizona because its title state was so heavily developed? What 1955 musical movie was filmed in Arizona because its title state was so heavily developed? Question number 3. Which of the 3 tenors set up his own international competition for young singers in 1982? Which of the 3 tenors set up his own international competition for young singers in 1982? Question number 4. What color is known as vert, V-E-R-T, on a coat of arms. What color is known as vert? That's spelled V-E-R-T, vert, on a coat of arms. Question number 5. What do the boys use to start a signal fire in Lord of the Flies? What do the boys use to start a signal fire in Lord of the Flies? Question number 6, and our last question. What fashion designer owns Maxim's restaurant in Paris? What fashion designer owns Maxim's restaurant in Paris? Go ahead and submit the correct answers to all 6 questions to drgordonpodcast1@gmail.com, and let's see if you will be the next winner.
You're listening to the podcast Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon, which is uploaded weekly on Sunday afternoons at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, on your favorite podcast directory.
A pleasant good afternoon to one and all. Welcome to Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon. We are very fortunate to have with us today a wonderful guest, Professor Piomelli. Now, let me just read something just really quickly to you, and I want you to get to know a little bit about her background before I have her say a few words to you. So, Not a Woman's Job is a memoir that Professor Piomelli wrote. She's a female architect who entered the male-dominated profession in 1960, pushing it to change towards equality, acceptance, and recognition of women's achievements. Professor Piomelli's life story begins during World War II, where as a little girl growing up in Naples, Italy, she and her family escaped with their lives on several heart-stopping occasions. And we'll have a chance to hear some of those occasions later. From Naples, she moves on to graduate from MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to work at leading private firms in New York City, and to become the first female dean of architecture in the United States at City College of New York. Her spellbinding, adventurous life takes the reader through a whirlwind of relationships, disappointments, survival, and accomplishments, demonstrating a fierce strength of will to excel against any and all challenges and doubters. In 2019, just last year, the Carnegie Corporation of New York named her a Great Immigrant, Great American for her notable contributions to the progress of American society. Welcome to Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon, Professor Piomelli. It's so great to have you with us.
It's nice to be with you and all your audience. Yes.
I'm so glad that you agreed to join and to share just a little bit about what your life has all been. Now, we have 30 minutes to cram 82 years. And so I know that October 24th is your birthday. And so we're recording this before your birthday, so happy birthday in advance. When this records on Sunday, when it's uploaded, when this episode is uploaded, it would be the Sunday after your birthday. So happy birthday in advance. You have a rich life story to share.
Yes. Well, you started mentioning that I was born in Naples, Italy. Naples, it's really an Epicurean town that has incredible amount of beauties, the Mediterranean Sea, the long walk along the sea, the marvelous food, and the marvelous songs. So I am not an unworthy daughter of Naples, but I don't sing. So you will not have any of that today.
That's okay. You don't have to sing, but you have lots of stories to recount and to share with us what you choose to let our audience know about your rich life story. What?
Well, Whitney was really wonderful because I had adoring parents, loving siblings. I have a brother and a sister. And by the way, a piece of Naples is left me there because my daughter has a wonderful daughter, and in her turn, she has children of her own, a boy, Daniele, and a girl, Marta. And my brother had the three children. Alberto, named after my father, has a son with a wonderful name, Leonardo. So that's very, very nice Italian name. And then I had two girls. One is Fulvia, who became an architect, and Gabriella, who is an accountant. Um, they also have children of their own. But at any rate, it's wonderful to be able to go back to Naples, and I don't go back enough, but I will in this my later years. And
Right.
my brother and sister were older than me, 8 and 7 years older. And we also had in our household um, a grandmother and a great grandaunt. So we had a very lovely family, and they all loved me, and I loved them, and it was a wonderful youth. And then suddenly there was World War II, and things became a little more difficult because I could see the worry in my elderly people's face, and so I stopped the jumping around basically.
Right. And so we're going to get to those interesting stories that you have told and shared. And by the way, folks, Professor Piomelli has written her memoir. It is entitled Not a Woman's Job, and it's the rise of a female architect in a male dominated field. And so I encourage you to check out Amazon, and you may get a copy of this memoir, either the paperback version of it, or you may receive the Kindle version. So it's entitled Not a Woman's Job, The Rise of a Female Architect in a Male-Dominated Field. And so, Professor
This field is so dominated by men that one of my first exhibit of women work, the premier writer for architecture on the New York Times, discovered that in America, they were 98.8% male. So that domination was really extensive.
oh, we're going to get to that, but I want to go take you back to Italy for just a second, and then we're going to get into all of the great things that you did as the first female dean of architecture in New York, in the United States. First starting off in City College, New York. But let's go back to your parents. What kind of parents did you have? Were they strict parents? What kind of values did they instill within you growing up?
Oh, I think they were both wonderful people, very humanistic. And my mother was at the tailor shop. She was a designer of clothing. And I was fortunate enough to go with her to Milan and Paris when I became a little older. And when my father was no longer around, then she looked for our companionship rather than her own husband. Um, and she was wonderful. She worked most of the time, and I really have taken a work ethic in my work. I mean, I appreciated her so very much. And the fact that she didn't actually spend the time of cuddling me or being with me all the time like a housewife. Um, I took that too. When I was working, I could have a wonderful babysitters and governess, and they lived with us and they spent time with the children when they were little. And I didn't feel guilty about that at all because that's how I was brought up. And not only loved my mother, but I respected her for her work and the kind of value that she really demonstrated. She didn't have to say anything. You just would look at her and you would know the amount of respect that was due to her for her choice and her life. And my father was mm, employed at the electrical company, but he was really an artist. And so he would spend his time doing pen and ink drawings. They were so marvelous that often they were framed and hung in my mother atelier. And he encouraged me to sit by on the other side of the desk and to do my drawings while he did his work. And he encouraged me so much. And then he thought that I had some talent and decided to enroll me once I was older into the Art Institute.
So instead of going to a regular school setting, you were enrolled into an art institute to help to uh, boost that natural born talent that you had as an artist that he discovered, that he saw that his daughter had.
Yes. And so he and I were very, very close.
That is wonderful. Now you mentioned early on about World War II, and I read through your memoir. I've had the privilege and opportunity to assist you. I mean, you did an excellent job in writing your memoir, and so I was allowed.
Good at
I was
helping me with the part, right?
was allowed to edit to do some editing of it, but it was nicely written. But I don't want to give any of the information away to the listening audience. I want them to get the memoir for themselves and to read it for themselves. But there's some excerpts that got my attention, and I won't go through all of them, but one in particular stood out to me that I wanted to share with the reading audience. Now, you talked about World War II. Now, we read in school about World War II and all the atrocities that had occurred and people that lived through it, and to have you here on the podcast to talk about what you experienced. I mean, you didn't just read about World War II, you lived it. It is phenomenal. So I'm still turning the page looking for, oh, here it is. And it was nicely worded. And so I just wanted to just read an excerpt so that folks can understand and know from your perspective what you experienced as a young girl, very, very young girl, growing up in Italy at the time of World War II. This got my attention. It was nicely and descriptively articulated. And here's what you said. One night, I was particularly sleepy when the siren sounded. Not readily cooperating about getting dressed, putting shoes on was especially difficult, as I had 3 pairs of socks on because of the cold bed. As we exited, I had difficulty walking. Dad picked me up to carry me and to hurry us up to get to the shelter. In so doing, one of my shoes came off, my only pair. So we had no other option but to find the shoe. Shoes were too precious to lose. We went down on all fours to look for it. The night was dark, and we could not see a thing. We had been looking for a while when my brother Foe yelled, "I got it! I got it!" We were all still bending down when we heard the explosion and saw the destruction up the stairway. Clouds of dust bloomed from the fallen buildings, and then screams, screams of those hurt, screams of children who could not understand or comprehend the horror and the blood and the destruction that shattered the night, the screams of the ones alive but hurt, the screams of those mourning the dead reverberated ominously. The dust blocked our view, but the screams and the cries reached us, piercing our ears and breaking our hearts. We embraced, hugging one another tightly as we understood that it would have been us there on our way to the shelter had we not stopped to look for a shoe. That was very well written and very well put. Uh, for
You
those,
see, life in that during World War II was just a matter of happenstance. And so it just happened that that shoe saved our lives. But in so many occasions, you would not know whether you would go back to your bed in the night or not, because the bombings were coming initially only in the evening and then the day and night. And that's why our parents decided it was too much for us children and we should really move away from Naples. You see, Naples is an important port, one of four ports in Italy. So everybody had an interest in destroying it. And therefore, the bombs were coming like
the
every.
bombs were, of course, for those who know, and this is just a review of World War II's history, these were the Germans that were dropping bombs there.
Well, initially, Mussolini, the head of the Italian party, was allowed was allied with the Germans, and then at some point in he decided that the Germans were losing, and the country was really against all the atrocity that the Germans were doing. And he was really at that point had no other choice but to abandon the German alliance. And he became allied with the American. So initially, the Americans were also bombing Naples. And then later on, the Germans tried to destroy as much as possible before they left Italy.
Right. And so it's key that you mentioned about you had a lot of socks on because it was really cold in the bed, as your memoir shared. So that speaks to the socioeconomic status at the time that your parents and your family were growing up in, where you didn't have a heater in the house. So in order to stay warm,
Nobody did.
right.
Mostly nobody did. It wasn't that we were exceedingly poor. We weren't rich, but the central heating was not heard of at the time.
True, right. And thank you for that clarity. And so you had what, 2, 3, 4 pairs of socks on to just stay warm. So of course your shoe didn't fit snugly or onto your feet. And so in the hustle and bustle of trying to leave the apartment to run to the bomb shelter, your shoe fell off. And according to your memoir, that was like the only pair of shoe that you had. And it was
Yes,
a commodity.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
The stores weren't open. It was hard to find things. So it was very much like the pandemic today. I think you may have some experience of what World War II was when you look around, maybe not in St. Croix, but certainly in the rest of the USA.
right, right. And so imagine that one item that might seem so insignificant to some people. I know some folks might say, "Oh, we'll just get another pair of shoes," but the
I
entire
think
the
there is
entire
another
family.
story that will clarify about the shoes.
Uh,
When we were in the shelter and the woman that had the child in a sack over her shoulder.
right, I remember reading that. I don't want to give too much away. I want your audience to read it.
I mean, it wasn't an unusual situation.
Right.
Yeah,
And so this is your mother, your father, your older sister, your older brother, and yourself. The five of you
yeah,
that were leaving the apartment to go to the bomb shelter. But that shoe, when all of you stopped to look for that shoe, that time was what was needed to save all of your lives. So that is phenomenal. I remember when I was helping with the editing, I said that's divine intervention. There's some other parts in your memoir that you shared where there's some close brushes with death that occurred. One that stood out to me was when your your mom sent your sister and you want to go somewhere, I guess to the store, and you wanted to go along with your sister, and one of the German soldiers saw the two of you and told you all to, well, he was speaking German, which you did not understand, and but he motioned with his gun by pointing it at your sister's head, and then motioned her up the stairs, like, go back, because at this time the Germans weren't as cordial or friendly to the Italian, because there were a
No,
group of,
yeah, not at all. We
yeah,
can blame them, really, actually.
because there were groups of Italian men that did not agree with the government at that time. And so they were referred to as being anti-fascist because they didn't want to have that government control, and they didn't agree. And so your father had friends, according to your memoir, and who all wanted to stand up against the government to make sure that Italy goes back to what it was before, that wonderful country of peace and prosperity that was not existing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it was interesting in that part when your sister and you were then told to go back up, but your sister was really quick thinking and quick-witted, where she started to speak in a loud voice. Okay, Mr. German soldier, we're going. What was it? Go ahead.
Come in, come in. I'll show you. There is nobody here. Just come and check it out. I mean, and my mother
Right,
heard screaming, and she was able to hide my father. And
right.
this
So
was shot.
that was quick thinking on your sister's part to speak up loudly, to just to give your mom the signal that, hey,
Yeah,
there's a German soldier coming into the house and dad needs to be hidden.
yes. And also, then, I mean, my mother was such a smart woman. She had developed such a wonderful hiding place for my father, who at the beginning was really not very much willing to put uh, at jeopardy all of us in case they would find him and so forth. But later he agreed, and when they started rustling up his colleague, his friends, his political friends, my mother turned to him and said, Alberto, I'm so glad you decided to stay with us. He hadn't decided. My mother had to put practically,
Right.
uh, you
And it was
know, pressure on him to say, no, you've got to stay. But that was such a wonderful, I really picked that up as the thing how to treat your husband with respect, even though may not have been his idea, but you make believe like it was.
well, it saved his life in the end because she helped to create a hiding place in the house, in the fireplace, and so the listening audience, they have to read more. I don't want to give too much of the memoir away, but one of the last things I'll talk about of your childhood before we get to education and architecture, which is the main crux of the conversation that we're having, is that because your father, he developed a terrible cough, and so he didn't want to be with his friends to give them away in case the Germans were looking for these Italian men who were fighting against them. So your mom convinced your dad to stay home and created this wonderful hiding place in the fireplace for him. And your mom,
Fireplace, your audience have to understand that is the entire height. It's the
it's a
chimney
huge
is in
fireplace, right?
like
So
a
there's enough room for him to be in there and to store
and
uh,
sit down in
and to
there.
sit. Yeah. So it was not a cramped
No,
quarter. He had lots of room in that fireplace as a hiding place that served him well. And your mom
but
used to,
mother was clever enough to put an armoire in front of it. She devised the system by which she could slide the armoire in front of the fireplace.
right.
Such a bright woman.
What was, oh, she was very intelligent. And what was very interesting was that she would prepare meals. Your mom would prepare meals for your dad's friends and have your sister and you take the food and leave it at a certain spot so the men could go and get the food. And this happened for a couple of days. And then one day, when your sister and you went to the spot to deliver the food, both of you observed that the food that you had delivered the day before was still there. And you were like, well, what happened? So you took the food that you just had been given by your mom, and as you're returning home, you saw your dad's friends digging ditches with German soldiers present. And it wasn't until later on you found out that the Germans had this, at that time, had this sick way of having people dig their own graves, shoot them, and they just fall in, and all they had to do was just cover them over. And you mentioned that in your memoir, and your mom was really sad. She had mixed feelings. She was so sad for those men because she knew them. These were your dad's friends, but she also was happy because your dad was not one of those men, because he was, he was at home. So his life was spared there. That's an
Yes, we were lucky about sparing my dad's life. There was a time that I really, really made a mess of it. I was very little, and I wanted to close the door of the balcony, in order to have light and air, and just a rail, and then there were shutters that were the entire height of the room. And I told my mother that I was old enough that if I climbed on a chair, I could close the shutters myself. And she said, okay. I mean, she was trying to be as accommodating as uh, she could. So I got on the chair, but I made a lot of noise pulling the shutter closed. Not that I could all the way, but in the on the road there was this German soldier that's yelled who's there, who goes there, da 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 da, whatever in German he said. But it was clear that he said, make yourself known or I'll shoot. And of course, my mother put a finger on her nose and saying, be quiet, let it be. And so she took me down the chair and she closed the shutter herself. And after a minute or two, my sister, my older sister, Francesca, and my father came down. They had been on the roof. And my daughter had, not my daughter, my
your sister.
sister had asked my father to see what was there was brilliant on the roof floor. And he bent down. As he bent down, there was this bullet that flew over his head.
Wow.
And if he had been standing, he would have gotten it right in his chest.
Wow. Again, divine intervention right there. So
Thank you.
lots of, and you have lots of other interesting stories in your memoir that you share. And so we're going to move on from childhood, because you had quite interesting childhood, not the normal childhood
Yeah.
that, or typical childhood that one would have growing up then during World War II. Uh, but you grew up, and you did finish art school where your dad had sent you to. Uh, uh, you also were very active in sports. I understand from your memoir, you were the gymnastic champion in 1950. I think you were 13 years of age when you won that title. And so you were very active with art, with gymnastics. And then you became older, and to just move us along, you discovered America. How did that happen? Where you went to MIT. So from
Yes.
Italy, Naples, Italy. I know I'm jumping a whole lot because there's a lot of wonderful, exciting stories there. But I want the listening audience to, get the memoir for themselves and read all the intricacies of your life. Lots of
Yes.
intricacies, folks. It's a page turner, like your son said. So, but now we're in America. How did you discover America? Just
Well,
briefly.
I discovered America because I was in the library of the School of Architecture at the University of Naples, and there were articles about what they were doing in America, the architects that they were working there, and that had been in the Bauhaus in Germany and had been kicked out, and now they started some school of architecture, Miss Van der Rohe at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and Gropius, and so many wonderful people. And I decided I have to study architecture. I want to study it with them. So that's how I discovered America.
And how did you discover MIT specifically? Because there's so many different colleges and universities in the United
Well,
States.
because my boyfriend that then became my husband was going as a Fulbright scholar. He was going to Harvard Medical School.
Wow.
So I had just two options in Cambridge. I either go to Harvard or I go to MIT. And since he was going to be a Harvard man, I decided I'd be an MIT woman, not to be in the same university. And uh,
But at that time, both of you,
and he was very supportive, and he wanted me to become an architect, and he wanted me to become a professional woman. He really bent backwards. First of all, he paid for my tuition, which my parents were not going to do. But
right.
there wasn't even an occasion. I mean, we didn't even ask my husband because he proposed that he would, so we let it go at that. But when I arrived in uh, in Boston, in Cambridge, after a long trip on the Leonardo da Vinci boat by myself because he had gone ahead of time, um, we realized I didn't speak English, I didn't speak American, I did not understand what was being said. And so my husband enrolled me in Boston University course for one full month, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Uh, that was English for foreign students. So by the time I was done, I had I was very excited they could understand what I was saying, and I could understand a lot of what was being said. Actually, more so than not my speaking. But then I decided, well, I better speak because otherwise, what do I do here without speaking? And I kind of extrovert, so I had no problem doing that.
And you still are, and you speak it well. I mean, because you were an adult when you learned English. You were what, 20, 21, 22?
Well, I
You
was a,
were, yeah,
I
how
was
old?
I was 17 when I got there,
Oh,
and I
to MIT?
mhm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so 17. Right, right. Okay. So by 2021, 22, you're just more than fluent in speaking English.
Yes, I was.
And
I
you
could
had,
understand the professor anyway, and so architecture. You do a lot of drawings, and I did a number of advanced standing because history of architecture and courses like that. We had them in Italy all the time from high school to the institute and then to the academy. I mean, I could take a advanced standing exam in all those courses, no problem.
wow. And so you did graduate from MIT with a degree in architecture, and then you landed a prestigious job. Is it with IM Pay? Did
Oh, that's
you?
much later.
That's much later.
After,
Okay.
after graduation, we had our son 3 months after I graduated. And then because of the Fulbright scholarship, we had to go back to Italy for 3 years.
Right.
So there was a whole other adventure in Italy for 3 years with this
Correct.
newborn kid. And
Right.
then we went back, and when we went back to America, we went to New York. And so in 1963, we were back in America and living in New York. And 63 was a very hard year. That was when Kennedy was assassinated. And it wasn't it wasn't easy. My husband was taking his medical board, and we were spending more time on television, and he had to give the exam the next Monday, and it was really quite a terrible thing. But it was wonderful, though, to go and work in New York, because for the first time after my graduation, and I went for an interview, and the architect, Mr. Abramovitz, said, "Where did you graduate from?" With a certain air, I was a girl there, was a young woman. And I said, MIT. So he stood up and he said, "Oh, please have a seat." So
The name said it all.
that was impressive. And so I did fine with him. And then I moved to a different firm where I did it as a young architect. I was probably 23 years old, and I did the two major buildings for this firm of Warner Burns, Stone and Lundy. And there are pictures somewhere in my book, so you can see what
Oh,
I did.
absolutely. As you're talking, we'll have the pictures shown so that the viewing audience can see your handiwork, because you did a lot of projects. One of the, or two of the main ones that are quite notable that you mentioned quite a bit are the library, Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and also Brown University Science Library, and
Rhode Island, yes.
in Providence, Rhode Island, correct. And and then you did some renovations as well. One that stands out to me from reading your memoir was the high school in Tarrytown in New York City. So you've done quite an extensive amount of work.
That high school had been abandoned for 10 years. So they only occupied the ground floor as a kindergarten. So it was very easy to see that a lot could be done with it.
Right.
There
And
was
so,
40
uh,
apartments.
right. And in between working as an architect, renovating, and also constructing, well, you weren't doing the constructing, but you have to design the buildings, the projects.
Construction and follow during the construction.
Right. Were you teaching at any of the colleges or universities, or were you working for IM Pay?
When I was working for IMPay, because everybody in the office had been teaching or being a dean somewhere or another, I decided, because I wanted to become a partner of that office, I don't think small, you see, I think big. And so I thought I should better get to the credential of teaching.
Correct.
And so I applied to teach at City College. But this was 1971, long time ago, and there were still not too many women around. I had already made a couple of exhibit of women's work. They had been referred into magazine all over the world, because then we would have copy of what they had written, because it was unusual to be a woman architect, not so much today, but it was unusual then. And so the dean of the school that I had applied to teach, that was again City College, um, he said, he wrote in the American Institute of Architecture journal, he said, "Well, we hear so much about women in architecture, but how come that nobody has asked me to offer them a job?" And so I very clearly answered in the same journal. The dean maybe didn't recognize recognized that I was a woman because I was wearing a pantsuit. But I did apply to the school. So he obviously got very annoyed and called me back and punished me by saying, yes, if you want to teach here, we have a night school from 7 to 11 o'clock at night if you want to teach a design studio. Two
Is this
times,
at City College, New York?
yes, yes. And so I talked it over with my husband, and he said, well, you have to do it. Otherwise, otherwise people will diminish this movement that you are trying to foster. And so you have to do it. So I did it for 3 years. I would work in the morning from get out of the house at 8, start working in the office from 9 to 6, and then I would drive up. Actually, we bought me a car because City College was into a very decrepit Harlem at the time. There were a lot of drugs around, and
It
it
wasn't safe for you to,
wasn't. It
right.
was,
So having the vehicle helped tremendously.
so that was the thing. So we got me a car, and I learned to do that. And I took as many students with me to the parking lot and drove them anywhere they wanted to go, especially to the subway station. And so we did that. And
Right. So I did some little background research, and I'll just summarize what happened from you mentioned 1971. So here's what I got when I looked you up. It says from 1971 to 1976, Professor Piomelli taught at the City College of New York School of Architecture as an adjunct associate professor, and from 1974 to 1979, taught at the Pratt Institute, where she served as chair of the faculty. And then in 1976 to 1979, oh, that's where you served as a chair of the Pratt faculty. But in 1979, she returned to City College, New York, as a distinguished professor and was appointed dean of the City College, New York School of Architecture in 1980, becoming the first woman to hold a deanship of any school of architecture in the United States. She served in this position, you served in this position until 1983. And then in 1984, you became a visiting distinguished professor at the University of California at Berkeley. And from 1985 to the present, well, at the present of the printing of this article, you had the position of full professor at City College, New York. In between there, you mentioned this earlier, Professor Piomelli spent much of her career promoting the work of women in architecture. In 1974, as director of the Equal Opportunity Committee for the American Institute of Architects, you organized an exhibit of women architects' work. This exhibit generated a great amount of interest in the standing of women in the profession, and you served as a member of the Board of Advisors for the International Archive of Women in Architecture from 1985 to 1995. And folks, if you think that's all, it's not. Professor Piomelli earned her professional licensure when she became a registered architect of New York State in 1969. Early on, she became a member of the American Institute of Architects in 1970 and served on various AIA committees throughout the 1970s, including Commissioner of the Schools of Architecture Committee of the New York City chapter from 1977 to 1979, and Director of the New York City Executive Committee from 1977 to 1979. And in between there, you did some publications, which I didn't know. You didn't tell me, but you did a publication that included Canary Wharf, London in the Third Millennium, back in March 1991. And you did some translations from English to Italian for some other publications as well. So all of many of your work that you have done can be found because it's housed at Virginia Tech University.
yes, in the Archive of Women Architects. There is an archive that was funded by Milka Bliznikov, a teacher there.
Right. And I believe you mentioned that there's a whole wing that's just dedicated to Professor Piomelli's works over the years. Your drawings, your artwork, your everything, papers,
Part of the archive.
is part of the archive. Right. Wow. And that's at Virginia Tech University.
Yes.
Phenomenal. Now, there might be some high school students or maybe even college students or even junior high school students who are interested in architecture. And this will be the last part of our podcast. Folks, again, I highly encourage you to check out her memoir, Not a Woman's Job, The Rise of a Female Architect in a Male-Dominated Field. There's a whole lot of information that we're just skipping over because of the time. We're talking about, a long amount of years that Professor Piomelli has worked and served as Dean of Architecture, and also growing up, a lot of
I
adventures took place that you need to
moved
read for
about
yourself.
places where I have been teaching, both in Italy, in Russia, and in the Vatican State, it's Virginia, and so forth and so on. And in each one of these places, there is some rather interesting story to read.
Lots of interesting stories, folks. You have to read the memoir yourself. I'm not going to say any more. But for those students who might be interested in architecture, what what are some skills do you think that they need to have in order to become a successful architect?
Well, I don't know about the skills as much as the thinking. I think that there is, I was surprised when I first arrived in the States, but also in other cities in Europe, where a bank, for instance, becomes a Greek temple. I mean, what do you do with the bank? You don't know what to do with the bank, so you take a model from some highly respected building type, and you decide, okay, this now it's a bank. And I think that that's the stuff to be avoided. When I first started with this office of Warner Burns, and they were doing this science library for Brown University, they were repeating the kind of building that were already on campus, which were the 5-story brick building. And because the program was so extensive, they would have had to have a lot of land, a lot of stretching of this building into this 5-story. And John Nicholas Brown, that was the president of Brown University at the time, really didn't like the idea. And I was invited. I mean, they wanted to show that there were people working on this project. And together with this man, this Englishman that was working with one of the partner, I was invited to go in the meeting, just sort of to be a presence, to see other people working on this project. And I was told, but do not talk, just be there and listen. And of course, I did otherwise, because the president was really kind of upset and about having spent so much time. The time to build this thing would have been enormous, and and so he was kind of upset. So I suggested, why don't we build a tower that will be on the edge of the campus and will be sort of an advertisement for the college for the rest
Is
of the
this
time.
Oberlin College or is this Brown University?
Brown University, Brown
Okay,
University.
in Providence,
And I said,
Rhode
why,
Island.
Rhode Island? And I said, why don't we build a tower that will be easy to build, and it will be fast construction, and we can slip form the tower. And Brown looked at me and to the other guy, and asked the director there, says, what does it mean, sleep forming? And obviously they didn't know. And so I said, well, that's easy. I took a piece of paper and I said, you see this paper? It doesn't stand up. It does not have structural strength. But if we take a plate and we fold it so that we can um, have a concrete slip form the tower, they will be easy to construct. And we folded this plate. You see, it stands up and it has its own structural integrity. It's called the folded plate. So the guy was impressed. And I became the designer of this project, age 23. So I was very happy. And they had to get this English guy to listen to me, or he would come over and say, oh, you needed to work on this window detail. And I said, no, I'm working out the tower meets the ground, because these four towers were meeting the ground, having at each feet of the tower, there were gardens that had the four signs, the four symbol of signs. So anyway, just to make a story much more uh, faster, that became my my claim to fame in that office. And so at that point, then I think that's what architecture is about. It's trying to create a solution for what the problems are, rather than picking a form out of your head and decide that this will do. I mean, everything will do, but it will not be the essence of the project. And similarly, we went over, I mean, the Oberlin College had money to build a new library. They have plenty of libraries, but they wanted to build another one, a major one on campus in Ohio. And they had been brought to see the Brown Library, and they wanted one just like that. But when I went to visit the site, and I realized that there were two wonderful buildings by Gus Gilbert, I didn't want to dwarf this building. They were done by this great architect on the late 1800s. And I decided that the building will be a low building and will be attached to a service building that was ugly. If the tower was standing by itself, it would have a lot of loose space around, and you could look all around, and I didn't like some of the buildings that were there. And so I decided that I'd pay homage to the Cass Gilbert building. I would back up the building to the service building, so we didn't have to look at this two-story building. And the librarian said a few things. She liked the tower, but I said, you know, that's so anonymous. Every floor it's the same. That the science library was more like where you keep the books and the people go and do research, and they didn't need much but the book to take. And I said that this is more than that. You want students to actually live here. And she said, well, the problem with the students, they only like music. They don't, I never know if they ever go into the room I assigned them to do their thesis work, so forth and so on. So I think that is the essence of architecture, to take a hint of what is that is really wanted, like make available the view of the students and see if they are doing their thesis work or not. That was one of the point. And the other point, she says, I like for them to have nooks and crannies where they can hide and read. And so that library at Brown had no nooks and cranny. It was just a storage, a wonderful storage for books. And And so I cooked a different kind of a project.
No, absolutely. So again, for students who are listening, would you say that having a good mind for math would help, like taking algebra, geometry, calculus, trigonometry? Would that
No, but
help?
how they discouraged the women from going into architecture.
Okay.
Like, for some reason, they thought that young women would not have an understanding of mathematics. You develop an understanding. You the study structure. You understand the structure. So it doesn't have to be that. It just has to be the willingness to explore and manifest your idea. I mean, the fact that what is in your mind can become material and can be occupied, and it should not just be a roof over a program. It should be the experiences that you're offering to people. You enter a space, you don't need the sign that says go right or right. No, you put a window at the end of the right so that they turn toward the light. They don't turn because of the sign that is there. And so forth and so on. There's a lot to be discovered becoming an architect. It's a wonderful thing, and I hope that whoever is listening of a young person decided to explore it, because it's really a wonderful job.
Profession, right? And so don't allow math to be a deterrent to them. If they have if they have creative thinking or critical thinking skills or an imagination, put that to use. And I mean, math is still important. We're not saying not to forget about math, but don't
No,
let.
but you
Mhm.
study that. Yeah, just a tool, but it's not what it is all about being an architect.
Right. It's much more than just math. It's
Yes,
the conceptualization, as you said, the creative thinking, the design concept, and the design delivery, being able to express that, creating
three
open
dimensions.
spaces. Yeah.
And
Um,
you will discover if you read my book why, from my book, it's not possible to see a horrible construction that is just across the street from Cass Gilbert building that showed no respect for the wonderful building that were there. And from inside my building, you just cannot see that building.
I remember hearing that story, and it's called argument by sign. I believe that the architect, the gentleman said, the guy said to you, I think he kind of put you down. He discredited your work and your worth, your abilities,
Well,
and
he
you.
thinks, what have I done to this woman architect, to this Italian woman architect? What have I done to her to be treated this way?
Well,
Who
he
does
says,
she is? I mean,
yeah, he wanted to know who does she think she is, and so you demonstrated who you knew you were by constructing the Oberlin
yeah,
college library that blocked the view of his building. So you didn't have to say a word to him. You just said by sign, we call it argument by sign. You demonstrated by designing a building that blocked the view of his building. And he didn't,
only from my inside my building. If you walked outside, you could see it, obviously.
right.
I denied the view from inside my building. Yes, I did that. Rightly so. You can take
Probably
a
felt, I'm sorry.
revenge. You can take a few revenges too, being an architect. You can really teach some manners to people.
And that was, I guess, your payback to him for being disrespectful and discrediting your work. So from your building, no one can see his building. They get to enjoy the beauty of what you have created, what you have designed.
Oh, am I able to say something about that too? I don't know if you know this or if you read about it, but at the time, the MUD Foundation was looking for a building to put their name on it. And they looked at all the building and construction throughout the USA, and they chose my building, and therefore they paid a good amount of money, all the construction, the expenses of the construction and design and construction of that building to Oberlin College who was then able to do other developments.
That's an honor. Hence, the reason why Carnegie Corporation last year gave that honor to you. I mean, you've received many honors over the years, but the Carnegie Corporation honored you as I have it written down here, Great Immigrant, Great American. And that's when they take time out to honor individuals who were born somewhere else but came to the United States and contributed their gifts, their talents to help make where they were and where they are much better than how they met it. And for those who may not know who Carnegie is, every 4th of July, Carnegie Corporation honors Andrew Carnegie's legacy by celebrating the wide-ranging contributions of immigrants who enrich American communities and culture, strengthen the economy, and invigorate democracy. Scottish immigrant Carnegie, who rose out of poverty to become a major American industrialist and philanthropist, believed that the infusion of talent that immigrants bring to the United States keeps American society vibrant. And so that's why you are one of many others who was recognized for your contributions to the United States by the work that you have done as an architect. And thank you for your work and for the years of service in education and academia, as well as in creating open spaces. We had a conversation where you mentioned that an architect is like being a doctor. Do you remember what you had shared there? How an architect is like a doctor?
No, I don't remember what.
You mentioned that sometimes a patient goes into a doctor's office and thinks they know what they need or what they want. However, the doctor has to guide them and tell them what it is that they really need. And likewise, as an architect, people come saying, well, I want this, I want that, but the architect has to guide using their experience and expertise, the client, to let them know, this is probably what you want, but here's what you really need for this space that you're trying to have me create for you. So you made that analogy between an architect and a doctor, which I thought was pretty clever.
Thank you.
And you also, I mean, you have a number of things that you share, and then we're going to have to end it because this is a long podcast. But one of the things you said was that the social experience that the architect gives the client is not only to provide a shelter to a program, but to provide functionality of open spaces that lasts. I believe that's one of the things that you've said. You have lots of nuggets of gold that you drop, and it's just for us to listen and to gain from that knowledge and wealth of information that you have shared in your memoir, so we get to know more about you and your work, and encourage others who might be interested in that field, that profession of architecture, creating spaces. Now, I remember I had given you a gift of a while back. It was a Bible, and you did something that surprised me, that shocked me, and then you said something that surprised me even more. When I gave you the Bible, because we've had lots of conversations, you know, we talked about architecture, we talked about your memoir, we talked about God. You held the Bible and you hugged it, which was like, and you said, "For me," and then you looked at the Bible and you said, "But I don't even know where to start." Uh, you know, I've never read it, so that was surprising to me because you are an avid reader. You love to read, and you've done so many works, a lot of works over the years, and I remember that touched me, and I wrote down, you know, some things some verses that you could look at in the Bible. So, and I shared them with you. So I'm just hoping that you've had a chance to look at it, read through it, and
Very
get to,
much.
yeah.
Very, very lovely to be able to go through it and understand.
Yeah. And it's just not for us to judge people or to assume things about people, but to just pool our resources together and in the spirit of love and respect, you know, share ideas without being visceral or being negative. So I enjoy having conversations with you about architecture and seeing your perspective about life and how things can be created. And there's lots of potential, and we're always still learning.
Yes,
So,
anybody would show an interest to talk to me, please pass on my telephone number, and so that we can allow them to have a conversation with me over the phone, because now I am in California, so we wouldn't be able to see eye to eye.
okay.
Tell them to get in touch with you, and then you can do some screening before you put them on to me.
I will do that. Yes, I will do that.
Oh,
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story and all of the things that you've done to help make America even better than what it was when you first came here. And
know about that, but thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to share some more time with you.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, that was Professor Piomelli. That's Maria Rosaria Piomelli Ambrosi. We didn't get into a whole lot of other information that she has. It's a wealth of information, but you need to check out that memoir, Not a Woman's Job, The Rise of a Female Architect in a Male-Dominated Field. So until next week, thank you so much. Don't forget, we have faith, we have hope, we have love. All three are very important, but the greatest of those three is love in order for us to have a harmonious society. See you next week.
Thank you for joining Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon as we learned about different perspectives of contemporary social and educational issues. We hope to educate and encourage as we analyze those topics that are important to you. Please continue to join us every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, as new episodes are uploaded on your favorite podcast directory. Don't forget to subscribe by clicking on the link below this episode and respond to our fun trivia questions at drgordonpodcast1@gmail.com. Remember, become that positive difference that creates a positive outcome in the lives of others as well as in your own life. See you next Sunday afternoon on Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon.